My name is Richard. I work on the business development team here at 500px. First off, thanks for joining this awesome night and trekking it through the snow. We're really excited to meet some new faces, bridge new connections with you guys, and hope that we can share the joy of this new revolution that we're talking about within communities. So just a show of hands, how many of you guys have used an Airbnb or used that before? How many of you guys have Uber and use that all the time? One of the things when we were discussing about this, which blew our minds, is these are the type of companies that didn't exist 10 years ago. The way in how we end up interacting with the world's changed vastly to rely on a lot of these communities. And these community-based companies are truly driving a lot of this revolution around here. So we're excited to explore a lot of these different scenarios. And a lot of these different ways in how we can connect and really change the world in some way. How many of you guys actually are on 500px right now? Or used it? Awesome. How many of you guys have licensed photos or know that we license photos before? Awesome. So just to give you a little prelude into things, 500px is a community of photographers and photo marketplace. And we have over 7 million photographers across 190 countries. And I like to think that it is the best photography community around the world. And so what we've ended up doing is it's about 6 years old, and today is actually our 2nd year anniversary of our photo marketplace. So what we do is we partner a lot of these folks from the community side who are great, amazing photographers, connecting this creative community and rewarding a lot of their creativity by partnering up with over thousands of different brands and agencies to help license a lot of photos to them. So kicking it off to Dorina, and we're just going to explore that. But if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of those folks on the 500px team afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. I guess to start the discussion, first of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Dorina Kulia. I'm a manager at Deloitte's Digital Innovation Lab. I also host Product Hunt Toronto, which is Product Hunt's first community-based event in the world and one of the largest ones to date. It's such a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to 500 Pixels team for inviting me. It is a great honor to share the stage with our incredible panelists. So get excited about it. We'll be talking a lot about community and its impact on the business landscape. But I guess to begin with, I would like to introduce our panelists. So to start, to my left, we have Rebecca Brown, who is with JWT. Rebecca has a lot of experience with social media and advising clients and creating digital strategies. Then we have Bowie Cheng, who is a general manager at Uber Eats, based here in Toronto. Andy Yang, who many of you probably have met, CEO at 500 Pixels, and Alan Lau, CEO and co-founder of WattPad. So I guess since we have such an awesome diverse panel, and each of you has, you have your own sort of perspective on what is community sourcing. How would you define it? And also, what is the difference between community sourcing and sharing economy or crowdsourcing? How would you make that connection?
Well, maybe I'll start first. I think community sourcing, we can kind of put them into two very different buckets. One is like Uber or Airbnb is transactional. There's the motivation for people to participate is because they want to earn money or they want to buy something. It's very monetary driven. But there's another bucket which is more like WattPad or 500 Pixels. The people who join the community, they don't expect any monetary return. In fact, their motivation is about sharing. It's about self-expression, about joining a community, joining a movement. And money is not involved at all in the entire process of joining the community. And we have to understand the motivation behind people and what values the company, whether it's Uber or 500 Pixels or WattPad, bringing to them to motivate them and encourage them to do what we want in a way.
Yeah, I would echo that, and we, as Richard said, or when we kicked off the panel, we do have a marketplace component, so it's not as altruistic as that might mean. But we definitely believe that the power of our community can create these amazing images, and we hope to inspire them by showing them other images from all over the world. And so if we can create this sense of wanderlust, this inspiration, and folks like JWT and businesses that want to tell their stories with our amazing images that are created by our community out of passion, out of love, then we win when our community wins. And so we give an industry-leading royalty payment back to our community, and that's a very symbiotic relationship. So again, we win when our community wins, because the more they can get out and take amazing images and get rewarded not just monetarily, but through exposure and recognition, then we can start that flywheel, and the content starts to accelerate, the community starts to accelerate, and we really win-win. So it's great.
Yeah, to me, the common thread across all of our business models is really the way we use technology to connect people and connect communities. And I think that's the real common thread there. In a world before Uber, before 500 pixels, before WattPad, the technology wasn't there where if you're looking for a ride, you could look to tens of thousands of your fellow community members to help you out and get you a ride. It's not something that would have been possible. And so one of the really amazing things that I think is happening in business today, and it's happening in business, it's happening outside of business as well, is leveraging technology to connect people. And I think that's the really remarkable thing about what is community sourcing or crowdsourcing or the sharing economy, whatever you want to call it.
I guess, my lens is a little bit different, because my job as an advertiser often is to help my clients either figure out how they can leverage communities of passion that are not part of their brand on behalf of the brand, or helping them figure out how they can activate community around their brand. So it's a little bit of a different way in.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I guess as sort of each of you has, you have your own lens on this new business model. How is this different? So using technology to connect people, and there are various transactions that are involved, and various things that you can do. How is this new business model different from perhaps more traditional ones? And what are some of the advantages that that companies can reap from leveraging community?
I think the main difference is allocation of time. And so if you think about the traditional work, right, like you have a full-time job. The thing with the sharing economy and these kind of gig economies is you can do these in discrete buckets of time, not necessarily full-time. So you can actually join all of our platforms. You could drive for Uber, you can be a photographer for IPX, and you can write for WattPad. And that's,
And you should do all these things.
Yeah, you should do all these things. It'd be super awesome. And you could maybe do them all at the same time. But it's these discrete allocations of time where you can be a bit more flexible, and you can almost choose your own lifestyle. And so as we, the kids growing up these days are going to have all these tools, all these platforms to use, so they can, rent out their Airbnb when they're driving their Uber, and then take, while photographing for FirePX, and they can start to get all these discrete buckets of time, plus the monetization that comes with those discrete pieces of time. So I think that's the real distinction, and that's the power of a community, because then they can start to take advantage of these platforms and start to learn from the communities that they're based in. So.
Yeah, the way we like to describe it to our restaurant partners, our merchant partners for Uber Eats is reach. It's just the sort of reach that's enabled by a digital platform just blows away anything that you've been able to do traditionally. Like we've got one example that I love to talk about is Hawker Bar, because I love the food there. But they're also in a part of the city where they're out on Ossington, and they don't open for lunch, right? The reason is there's not a ton of foot traffic out there, and lunch volumes, if you're a restaurant, tends to be predicated on how much foot traffic you get in the neighborhood. But they started opening up on Uber Eats, and when they do Uber Eats, they're doing hundreds of meals in a day, more than most folks downtown are doing in a lunch service. And so it opens up the way you can think about your business in a way that previously wasn't a reality.
Yeah, and I think for the common I agree 100% with what you said, but one thing is quite interesting is in a way, we are all disrupting existing business. We are disrupting the book publishers, you are disrupting Getty Images, you are disrupting, of course, the taxi industry, right? For all those industries, the barrier of entry to participate, and that's whether as a taxi driver or as a taxi company or publish a book, it was extremely difficult because there are so many barriers that you have to go through. Now, all those barriers are gone. You can choose your own adventure in a way.
What are some of the perhaps examples of companies that you think are looking ahead, or any community sourcing initiatives that you found to be very successful? Are there any common traits there?
Are there common traits? I think if you look at community source-based companies that are successful, sort of and that tick the boxes both from a business point of view and I guess selfishly from my lens, from an effective storytelling advertising model, Airbnb would have to be really, really high up on the list, right? So that to me is a company that has taken its core value proposition and aligned it with an extremely powerful story, and that story is told in a seamless way across all of its touch points. To me, that's not just a model of how companies that are seeking to disrupt, might proceed, but it's also a model for companies that aren't seeking to disrupt, but who are trying to figure out how to tell their story in an age of disruption might need to behave. So sometimes my job is about helping companies that they're not trying to sort of blow themselves up and start all over again, but they exist sort of in this moment of tension where a lot of the world is trending in that way. So they're kind of, they're borrowing storytelling methodology, if you will, from the disruptors because they need to.
Interesting. So maybe, but perhaps the next step for them is to actually, innovate and disrupt and sort of take
we'll
the next
have
step.
to
Yeah.
see,
Yeah.
right? Seems like, I'm curious what my co-panelists have to say. The industries where you're seeing and agree, it's super early days. So in these early days, the industries that have been able to kind of blow themselves up or that have been able to successfully disrupt are mostly industries that don't heavily rely on really, really deep infrastructure, because it's just faster and easier, right? Writing, I'm a person, I can write in my spare time. I don't need mass cooperation and a ton of infrastructure in order for me to accomplish that. So I think it's going to take more time, of course, before you see more disruption with the more embedded industries.
Right. So, but
Do you disagree? So it
I
could
think
be a
it's a fair
simplistic
point.
lens, but
No, I think it's totally valid because whether an industry is ripe for disruption, it kind of comes back to how inefficiently is that industry operated today, right? And I think that's kind of what you're hinting at. when you talk about
or
embedded.
how inefficiently is it operating, but maybe not. Maybe sometimes it's how many people have skin in the game of that inefficiency, right? Because sometimes people are staked into systems that are highly inefficient. So just to disrupt it is a ton of work. A lot of things many stars would have to align.
In order for that disruption to be worthwhile. And
Well, yeah, in order for, if you have, many players invested in a system, even if the system is inefficient, right,
Yeah.
then it takes sort of significant pressure, I think, to make it worthwhile, if you will, for people to back away from that inefficiency. So I think that those larger, deeply infrastructural organizations, it's just going to take more time and more pressure before that will happen.
yeah, I think that's a totally valid point.
One trend that I noticed is the successful disruptors. There's one thing in common. They don't automate the existing industry. They liberate. They are bottom-up competitors rather than top-down. Like Uber. In a way, you guys ignore the regulations, ignore the existing system, do your own thing. In a nice way, in a positive way. Okay?
Of course.
Airbnb as well. We ignore the publishers for the most part for the longest time. And that's where we see the most traction, and I can name many more examples. So I guess I don't disagree with what you said, but I think if the disruptors, they figure out a way to kind of work around the system, bottom up, and find entry points into the system where they can make the system massively more efficient, that's very, very disruptive.
And maybe to bridge the two perspectives there, and I didn't have a good answer for this on the spot, but I guess my perspective is, if you take publishing as an example, it's difficult for a publisher to want to disrupt yourself. It's just challenging to do. And so, Alan, 2006, comes up with a different way to do it that bypasses what traditionally, I'm not close with the publishing industry, but my guess is you probably have to jump through at least a couple of hoops to publish a book and get it out there. To bypass all that and put it out there for a really affordable rate, if not totally free, that's a challenging thing to do if you're a publisher.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll note that I didn't mention is, like, between all these communities, if you think about all the disruption that's happening, these communities have immense data that they're contributing to the platform. So really, we use our community, and I know Alan does as well, to curate this content, to curate these experiences. So I'm a Netflix alum, so Netflix is using their viewership, their community, to curate the content they create. And this is essentially a window into preferences, into taste, into personalization. And that's what makes communities really powerful, because as a community, we learn as a platform through our community, and then we can surface much more interesting content. So I know WattPad does that. I'm sure Uber leverages the power of their data. So it's really the power of this community data that helps reinforce the powers of these communities. So.
And I guess from the user perspective, the more that I use the platform, the better my experience is, and I guess there is loyalty element there as well. Interesting. So you've provided examples of successful campaigns. Very interesting. I did not realize some of these were taking place, but I'm sure you've also learned a lot of things from failures. What are some of the things that maybe experiments you've tried engaging the community that did not work as you expected, and what did you learn from those? Very safe environment.
I can go first.
Please.
We have many learnings of I think it's we've learned over and over again, like, we cannot over communicate to our community enough, and so when we make changes, grand sweeping changes we recently changed our logo, we launched a localized Chinese version of our site, we revamped our iOS and Android. All these things happened within the frame of 4 months, and we under-communicated with our community, and so the community was confused. They were upset that we weren't more proactive in communication, and so I think as all of us help run businesses, is that it's that constant communication, because communities can quickly turn against you, and that you can quickly anger a community by not enough transparency. Transparency is a fabric of who we are at 500px, but we just unfortunately just didn't anticipate how proactive we needed to be. And so over and over again, our learning is that we have to communicate more, and even though we feel like we're saying something enough, we're not saying it enough. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, when one runs afoul in these situations, it's because you're not respecting the desires of the community, right? Like, so you're constantly, certainly from an advertising perspective, you're constantly having to negotiate between what data and common sense and listening tells you the community is interested in, what the message the brand wants to convey, and sometimes, big creative opportunities. So I think that, like, it's really about respecting that which the community is telling you they want, and working within sort of those guardrails. And it's when you kind of step out of that and try and push things that aren't consumer centric or aren't community centric that you run into problems.
Sometimes we for any company, community-based company, they would run into issues that's you have to make a decision. Perhaps it's in the best interest of the company, but not in the best interest of the community, and vice versa. And how you can make that decision. So in a way, we have to make sure the community comes first, because we have no lock-in. Our users, they can close their account and move on to another community that is better, nicer, if they choose to, in a second, right? We don't store the credit card. We don't charge them for a year, so that we lock them in with another carrier. So we actually don't have a lot of power. We don't own the community. We're just providing a platform for people to congregate. So a lot of times, sometimes we have to make decisions that's conflicting, but we have to make sure we think about the community first. We're not always right, and sometimes we make bad decisions as well, but in a way, that's one of our guiding principles. User obsessed, very important.
I would second Andy's point around, and I'm sure we've all been in the same boat, where in the tech world these days, you're moving so fast. We're moving so fast, and the danger is you sometimes become too internally focused, and things that are obvious to us, when we're building our own businesses, is not obvious to our community. Like, some of the things that we haven't done an amazing job of at Uber is telling the stories of our driver partners, our restaurant partners. The small business that is run by, I want to say Maroli, is one of our favorite partners, and they're a great example. And I speak to the owners the other day, and they came to the country, they started a restaurant, they love their restaurant, and the additional business they get through Uber Eats, that means so much for their restaurant and for their family. And that's something that doesn't always come through when we tell the story to other restaurant partners, but also to the public. And you think about Uber drivers, and for us, more than half of our Uber drivers are on the road less than 10 hours a week, and it's the teacher who's picking up a couple of shifts after work, or the single dad who's a construction worker and drives on Saturdays to pay for a vacation. These are stories we haven't done a great job at telling as we've grown quickly, and so I think that's a real important lesson there.
So I guess it's sort of to summarize learnings, it's over communicating, really driving the message there, making sure that you're communicating with the community. It's managing expectations, telling their stories, right? And also it's sort of like ownership versus facilitation. You're not necessarily owning the platform, you are facilitating all the activity. Makes sense. And I guess, Alan, you brought up an interesting point around balancing the needs of community versus needs of a company. You need to run a profitable business. It's usually a very hard decision. How do you do that when you have sort of a community versus company sort of debate? How do you make that call?
I think a big part of it is just transparency. It's one of our operating principles at Uber. We're building a business, and part of the business is, you got to finance that business. But at the same time, I don't think that needs to be at odds with building a thriving community. I think Alan said it best, where if you're customer obsessed and you focus on building great experiences and great products that enable those experiences, usually the rest kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah, we could have just add more banner ads on our website, and we could be hugely profitable instantly. But we stay away from that, because if we do that, it would significantly negatively impact the user experience, and that's why we try very hard to innovate on the business model, and that's why we came up with the example that I used in the advertisement, which is a win-win-win-win for everyone in the value chain. But that requires a lot of work to make it happen. But sometimes you have to spend the time, make the effort to figure those things out, because if it works, it's actually much more powerful.
Yeah, for us, it's always community first. So we start with that ethos of, what can we do that's best for our community, and obviously surviving as a company is great for our community because we provide the platform for them to showcase their best work, to monetize, and so there's kind of like a slider bar, right? So we try to do as much for our community as possible while still maintaining a viable business and a scalable business at that. So in that sense, if you can put the community first and then slide the bar towards that community, and then the other side would be like scaling the company and profitability. Like there's a balance there. It's going to take judgment as we move that slider bar back and forth.
So community first, being very customer obsessed, and then hopefully those things take care of the rest. I guess as we're looking into this year, and it's still sort of beginning of March, it's now March already, but as you're looking into 2016, what are some of the trends you are noticing with respect to community sourcing? What are some of the trends that perhaps you're setting? Maybe a prediction that you can share. What is, if transparency will always sort of be a theme, but if you were to say, 2016 will be a year of community, I guess, in what way? And perhaps again, you can make a prediction or just share something that you're excited to champion this year.
Where should we start? I'm happy to. One of the things that we're starting to see at Uber is businesses, like small, medium-sized businesses, even enterprises, starting to embrace the sharing economy and technology in ways that they haven't before. Where we see that on Uber Rush is in online delivery, e-commerce, and thinking about how, as a small business, take Shopify, for example. Shopify is one of our national partners on Uber Rush, and you could have a shoe store on Shopify, and if you're running a shoe store on Shopify, you're thinking about how do I compete with the Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world, and how can I find partners that will give me that same reach that some of my competitors have? And they're looking for that in a proactive way that I don't think was the case even a year and a half ago. And so that's something that we're starting to see in the industry now that we're really excited about.
I think for us, as we look at communities and specifically in imagery and brands as they tell their stories, I think 2015 was all about authenticity. And we kept hearing this word like authentic lifestyle is authentic to my individualism. And then we started getting the parodies of authentic lifestyles. The most popular example was this hipster Barbie. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but she'd be like, "Oh, my lifestyle's so much more authentic to yours." It was more of like a riff on like,
Hipster Barbie is hilarious.
Hipster Barbie is super hilarious. But it's like, how do you be authentic when most things are now mass produced, and the platforms, like the mass media platforms of these days, of the new media age, are Instagram. So as advertisers and brands start to push content and push advertisements to these platforms, how do you remain authentic to the experience, to the product, to the community? I think we're going to see an evolution of that. So much less this buzzword of authenticity, but kind of moving on. I don't know really what's next, but I think what we've been riffing on internally is this concept of originality and original thought, original takes, original, just this ethos of originality is starting to take hold. And so that doesn't mean you have to be distinct and something new. Original can just be something that you take and evolve. And so it's not necessarily so much about I'm just living an authentic life to myself. It's more of like I'm living my life, which is like original in and of itself. So it's this very ethereal concept. We're trying to like flush it out into more meaningful, concrete terms, but we're starting to think through like what comes after authenticity.
Well, I plan to say very similar to what you said, so I have to find some new things to say.
Be original.
So I guess I'll keep it short. I believe the TV spots, the 30-second TV spots would become even less and less effective, and advertisers would be looking for immersing themselves into the community to market directly in a very subtle way, rather than, hey, buy me now, buy my ticket now, or buy buy my product now. That doesn't work anymore. You have to immerse in the users' daily lives and share your brand, how you can bring values to those users. So in a way, very similar to what you said. So what I also want to say is, as a prediction, it may not be this year, but I think in 10 years, jobs that we know today would largely disappear. I'm not saying all the jobs would disappear, but like Uber, Airbnb, like you mentioned earlier in the conversation, the jobs are being disrupted in a way that no one would be, I should say, a lot of people would be working not for a single company, they are working for themselves, but working for 5 or 10 different share economy or community, and use those income combined to make a living. And I don't think the society is ready for that from a policy perspective or from social security perspective. I think we are breaking a lot of new grounds that nobody knows what world we're getting into. So it's very exciting. I think this is the revolution as big as the Industrial Revolution, agricultural a few hundred years ago. I think we are right in the middle of that transition. It can be potentially a painful transition, but I'm very optimistic about the outcome. Once we figure out all those uncertainty, I believe the world will be in a better place.
Yes, also that comes with developing a lot of. I'm just kind of thinking, well, you need to develop more skills, right? To be competitive in that world. Like,
yeah, you need to be able to drive and write and take pictures in the car.
Yes, never too early to get started.
I guess I wouldn't pretend to know what's going to happen. I think I'll stumble and make a prediction anyhow. But just as a quick sidebar, I'm pretty sure that I saw a trend report earlier this week that said that visual trend in 2016 is anti-authenticity, which is very, very skilled visual storytellers on Instagram are now creating highly, ironically staged photos, as a in your face to authenticity. So I think my first prediction is that when it zigs, it will also zag. But I think that with regards to community, I don't think that one can say 2016 or 2017 is the year of community. I think what year hasn't been the year of community? We're people, and we've always found community. So I think that increasingly it's about where do we find community, how does technology assist us or get in the way of our finding technology, and often how will humans sort of circumvent the intention of the technology or the author to find community as they see fit. So I don't really know what will happen. Something that this is not a trend, it's just sort of an interesting anecdote, but something that I noticed recently that I think is kind of funny is so we all get served sponsored Facebook posts, and so they're not being served to people because we've all opted in to a community. It's not like we're all following that page. That's why we're getting that message, reading that message, we're being targeted. So recently I've been served a message from a company called Soylent, repeatedly, and there is a community of people discussing whether or not Soylent is a completely dumbass name in the comments thread of that sponsored post. And it's been circulating for months, and the conversation goes on, and the people have no connection to each other. They don't live in the same place. They just share some demographic attribute that allow them to all be targeted by this ad, but they're talking to each other about whether or not Soylent is a really stupid name. Did they know, and was it Soylent Green, or did they realize that or not? So to me, that was certainly not the intention, I don't think, of Soylent when they created that ad, but humans found a way to make community happen sort of inside of that, pretty inauthentic moment. So I thought that was really interesting. I think that, again, from a brand perspective, something that's interesting is that brands, they understand that the consumer big established brands, I think, understand that the consumer wants them to behave more like the startups and the authentic brands that they love. And so it's interesting to see how the larger brands are starting to try and model that behavior. Something that I think might happen in 2016 is you might see more communities of brands, which would be interesting partnerships between established players and maybe sometimes less established players, to do good or to storytell or to offer value to, to a shared community of consumer. So that might be something that will happen.
Interesting. So like more collaboration between brands and sort of
Yeah.
right. I guess the example of the unintentional community within an ad, it's quite interesting. So I guess like the lesson is be prepared for that to happen. That you may not expect community building to happen
Sure.
on a certain platform.
Right.
But
And if you were that company, you might, you might be saying to yourself, well, what can we do with this now? We didn't intend for it to happen, but it has. So how can we leverage it?
absolutely, that definitely makes sense. So I guess in the interest of time, I do see we're running a little bit over, but we do want to open up the floor to some audience questions. Could I get a note in terms of how much time we have for audience Q&A? Okay, cool. Yeah, so we have the first question, please.
What do you feel is most lacking in innovation? If you can wave a magic wand, say this is what I want to do in terms of communication.
Good one. What's lacking? I think you touched on this. The potential impact there when we think about community sharing and naturally I'm thinking about Uber and the ride sharing world is the change is happening so fast and there's so much good that's coming out of it. It's keeping all the stakeholders in the community aligned and on the same page and thinking ahead and solving for the future rather than hanging on to how we used to do things. I think this is true in any organization, and communities in a lot of ways not that different. When you're going through a lot of change, how do we adapt with the changing times and focus on the future rather than be caught up in the past? And so I think that's something that as a community, as we continue to innovate and the pace of change increases, we're going to have to think a lot about.
Yes, please. Raise it first. Yeah.
There's a lot of new tech trends and innovations happening. For example, like the virtual reality, chatbots, IoT. I'm just wondering if you guys are looking into those areas, and if you are, what are some of the things that you might be doing with them? So, like, for example, chatbots. I know Uber. Like if I go on Slack, I can order a cab, right? So I'm just wondering if there's anything you guys are doing within those realms.
I can speak to how we think about partnerships in general, and I would love it. This is my personal opinion. I'd love it if wherever you are, it was really easy at the push of a button to get lunch or get dinner or get a car or whatever it might be. I think we're going in that direction, and smart partnerships with other folks, other companies that see the world in the same way. If it accelerates the path to that vision, that's great.
For us, being a visually oriented company, we've looked at virtual reality, augmented reality, and we want to understand how easy it is for content creators to produce this. And so right now, it's very limited. You have to be a pretty specialized production house. There's large kind of infrastructure costs, if you will. But we see also on the consumer side, those tools are becoming more available. So Nikon launched a 360 cam. So those tools are coming. I guess our best proxy is GoPro. On are people going to want to consume that content in a large amount, and so I think of it always as a personal use case. Am I gonna want to come home after this panel and sit with this big thing on my face for like 4 hours? Like I'm trying to think of that use case. Like, hey, for some of that might be cool for maybe gaming, other types of use cases. But by and large, I'm like, okay, unless the content's really compelling and it's coming from all over the place, then I can't foresee that happening. So it's almost like this chicken and egg thing. If the content's there, then I and the rest of the community will do it. If it's not there, then it's going to be a flash in the pan like some of the other technologies. So we're kind of waiting and seeing.
For us, at its core, we are a storytelling company. So we are not really limited to text-based fiction. So for instance, in some countries we have a TV show under a brand name as the TV adaptation of WattPad stories. So we are getting into other form of media as well. So like virtual reality, I believe is still very, very early days. It's super expensive. There's not a lot of content, but I think fast forward 10 years from now would be quite similar to what we look at smartphone in 2006. So when the infrastructure, when all those enabling technology and content available, I would not be surprised that people would be watching WattPad stories on the Oculus. But that will be quite a few years away.